My name is Olivia. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my father looked me straight in the eyes during a family dinner and said something that made the entire room go silent. "You're a failure," he said calmly, as if he were simply stating a fact. "Your sister built a real career, your brother runs a successful company, and you're still chasing childish dreams." Everyone at the table heard it. My mother looked down at her plate, my sister avoided my eyes, my uncle quietly sipped his drink, and I just sat there, frozen. Then something strange happened. My phone started vibrating on the table. At first I ignored it, but the screen kept lighting up. One message, then another, then 10 more. Finally, my cousin leaned closer and whispered, "Olivia, why is your name on the TV?" I slowly turned my head toward the television mounted on the wall of the restaurant, and that's when I saw it. A breaking news banner running across the bottom of the screen. My name, my full name, and the words that followed made my father's face turn completely pale. But before I tell you what happened next, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your country in the comments. Now let's begin. 3 weeks earlier, my life looked very different. I lived in a small apartment in the city, nothing fancy, just a quiet place with white walls, a tiny balcony, and a desk by the window where I spent most of my nights working. My family never really understood what I did. To them, I was just writing things on a laptop. My father especially didn't respect it. He had been a businessman his entire life. Discipline, structure, predictable results. To him, success meant suits, offices, and clear job titles. My work didn't fit that world. I was a journalist, but not the kind that appeared on television. I investigated stories, quietly, patiently. Most of the time, no one noticed. Months could pass without recognition, and my father hated that. Whenever we had family gatherings, he would compare me to my siblings. My sister Emma was a surgeon. She saved lives every day. My brother Daniel owned a chain of construction companies. And then there was me. "Olivia writes articles on the internet," my father would say with a small smile that wasn't really a smile. I tried not to let it bother me, but sometimes it did. Still, I kept working because I believed in what I was doing. And 2 months before that dinner, I started investigating something that would quietly change everything. At the time, I didn't know how big it would become. It started with a simple email, anonymous, no name, no signature, just a short message. "If you want a real story, look into the Northbridge housing project." At first, I almost deleted it. Journalists receive strange tips all the time. Most of them lead nowhere. But something about that message felt different. Short, direct, confident. So I started digging. Public records, government contracts, construction permits. And the deeper I looked, the stranger things became. Millions of dollars were moving between companies that didn't seem to exist. Construction reports were signed by engineers who weren't listed anywhere in professional registries. Entire buildings were being approved without proper safety inspections. At first, it seemed like small corruption. Then something strange happened. One name began appearing again and again in the documents. A development company called Harrington Development Group, and the person who owned it, Marcus Harrington, a powerful businessman with deep political connections, the kind of man journalists usually avoided because investigating people like him could destroy careers, or worse. For a moment, I considered stopping, but the more I looked, the worse the evidence became. Missing safety tests, fake inspection signatures, payments routed through shell companies. Then one night, I found something that made my hands go cold. An internal memo buried inside a set of financial records. It mentioned structural shortcuts in several new apartment buildings. Concrete quality reduced, steel supports modified, inspection reports falsified. If it was true, thousands of families were living in buildings that might not even be safe. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, my heart beating faster with every second. Because if this story was real, it wasn't just corruption, it was dangerous. and I was the only person who had noticed. That was the moment I made the decision. I would finish the investigation, no matter how long it took. But I had no idea that while I was quietly gathering evidence, someone else had already realized what I was doing, and that realization would lead directly to the dinner where my father called me a failure. The first time I realized someone might be watching me, it was late at night. I remember the exact moment. Rain was tapping softly against the window of my apartment, and the only light in the room came from my laptop screen. Documents were spread across my desk: contracts, inspection reports, construction permits. For weeks, I had been quietly piecing together the truth behind the Northbridge housing project. At first, I had already discovered something terrifying. Several of the buildings approved by the city had failed internal safety tests. Not small failures either, structural weaknesses that could cause serious damage if something went wrong. But those reports had been hidden, replaced with falsified inspection approvals. Someone had deliberately covered it up. And every document pointed back to the same company, Harrington Development Group. The deeper I looked, the worse the evidence became. Missing safety tests, fake inspection signatures, payments routed through shell companies. Then one night, I found something that made my hands go cold. An internal memo buried inside a set of financial records. It mentioned structural shortcuts in several new apartment buildings. Concrete quality reduced, steel supports modified, inspection reports falsified. If it was true, thousands of families were living in buildings that might not even be safe. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, my heart beating faster with every second. Because if this story was real, it wasn't just corruption, it was dangerous, and I was the only person who had noticed. That was the moment I made the decision. I would finish the investigation, no matter how long it took. But I had no idea that while I was quietly gathering evidence, someone else had already realized what I was doing, and that realization would lead directly to the dinner where my father called me a failure. When something strange happened. One afternoon, while reviewing financial transfers between shell companies connected to Harrington's business, I noticed a familiar name appear in the records. At first, I thought I was mistaken, so I looked again, then again, but the name didn't change. It was my father's company. My heart began beating faster because my father owned a mid-sized logistics firm. For years, his company had supplied materials to various construction projects across the region. I had always known he worked with big developers, but I had never paid much attention to which ones. Until that moment. The financial record showed a large payment made from Harrington Development Group to my father's company for structural steel supply. The date matched the construction phase of one of the apartment towers under investigation. I leaned back slowly in my chair, trying to process what I was seeing. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe his company had simply provided materials. That didn't necessarily mean he knew anything about the safety issues. But the thought still made my stomach twist, because if my investigation exposed Harrington, it might also drag my father's company into the story. For the first time since starting the investigation, doubt crept into my mind. Should I stop? Should I ignore that connection? But then I remembered the engineer's warning. The supports aren't strong enough. And I imagined the families living in those buildings, children sleeping in bedrooms beneath weakened concrete, parents trusting that the structures around them were safe. That was the moment I made my decision. The truth mattered more than my father's opinion, so I kept investigating. And 2 days later, everything exploded. It was a quiet Sunday evening when my father called. His voice sounded cheerful. "Olivia," he said, "your mother and I are hosting a family dinner on Thursday. Everyone will be there." Family dinners were rare. My father only organized them for special occasions. "What's the celebration?" I asked. "Oh, just family time," he replied casually. Then he added something that made my chest tighten slightly. "And I want you to come too. We haven't seen much of you lately." I agreed. At the time, I didn't know that by the end of that dinner, my father would call me a failure in front of everyone, and seconds later, my name would appear on national news. Thursday night arrived faster than I expected. The dinner was held at my parents' house, the same house where I grew up. A large dining table filled the center of the room, polished so perfectly that the overhead lights reflected off its surface. Everything looked normal. Too normal. My mother was in the kitchen preparing food. My sister Emma had already arrived and was helping set the table. My brother Daniel was sitting in the living room scrolling through his phone. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful, but something about the atmosphere felt strange, like everyone was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it. "Olivia," my mother said warmly when she saw me, "you look tired. Are you working too much again?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She hugged me quickly before returning to the kitchen. My father entered the room a moment later. He looked exactly the same as always, tall, serious, calm. But when his eyes met mine, I noticed something unusual. He was studying me. Not warmly, not proudly, just observing. "Good to see you," he said. "You too, Dad." Dinner started shortly after. At first, the conversation stayed light. Emma talked about a surgery she had performed earlier that week. Daniel discussed a new construction contract his company had secured. My father listened carefully to both of them, occasionally nodding with approval. Then his attention slowly turned toward me. "So, Olivia," he said calmly, cutting a piece of steak on his plate, "how is your writing career going?" The table grew quiet. Everyone knew that tone. It was the same tone he always used when he didn't respect something. "It's going well," I replied carefully. "Really?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm finishing an investigation right now." My father raised an eyebrow. "Another article?" "Yes." "What about?" For a moment, I hesitated. I hadn't planned to talk about the Northbridge investigation yet, but something inside me wanted to answer honestly. "Construction corruption." The room went silent. My brother looked up from his phone. My father slowly placed his fork down. "What kind of corruption?" "Inspection fraud, unsafe materials, fake safety approvals." My father leaned back slightly in his chair. "That sounds serious." "It is." He studied me for a long moment. Then he chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "You know, when you were younger, you used to talk about becoming a writer who changed the world." I felt my stomach tighten. "Yes." "And now you investigate construction paperwork." I didn't answer. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but my father wasn't finished. He looked around the table, then back at me. "You see, this is what worries me about you, Olivia," he continued calmly. "You chase dreams without understanding reality." My brother quietly stood up and walked to the kitchen. He clearly didn't want to be part of what was about to happen. My father folded his hands together. "Emma saves lives," he nodded toward my sister. "Daniel builds companies." Then he looked directly at me. "And you?" The pause felt heavy. "You write stories on the internet." The words landed harder than I expected. "I investigate real issues," I said quietly. My father shook his head. "No," he replied. "You chase attention." My mother whispered softly, "Please, let's not argue." But my father continued, "Do you know how many people actually read investigative articles online?" "Dad." "Very few," he interrupted. Then he said the sentence that froze the entire room. "You're 32 years old, Olivia, and you're still pretending this is a real career." No one spoke. My chest felt tight. I tried to stay calm. "I believe in what I do." My father sighed. "Belief doesn't create success." Then he leaned forward slightly and said it. "You're a failure." The words hung in the air like something heavy and permanent. My mother looked horrified. My sister stared at the table. I felt my face grow warm, but before I could respond, my phone vibrated on the table. Once, then again, then again. At first, I ignored it, but the vibrations didn't stop. My cousin, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, suddenly looked up at the television mounted on the wall. "Wait," he said slowly. Everyone turned toward him. "Why is Olivia's name on the news?" My heart skipped a beat. "What?" I asked. The television volume was low, but the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen was clear. "Breaking news. Investigative report exposes massive construction fraud." And beneath it, my name, Olivia Carter, independent journalist. The room went completely silent. My father slowly turned his head toward the screen. The news anchor continued speaking. "An investigative report released tonight has revealed shocking safety violations connected to the North Bridge housing project." Images appeared on the screen. Documents, inspection reports, financial records, all the evidence I had spent months collecting. The report alleges that thousands of families may be living in structurally unsafe buildings. My sister gasped. "That's your investigation." I couldn't speak because I hadn't released the article yet, not officially. Then something strange happened. The anchor said the name that made my father's face lose all color. Harrington Development Group. My hand froze on the table. Because everyone in the room knew something. My father's company had supplied materials to that project. The camera showed more details, financial transfers, supplier contracts, and for a moment, one of the documents displayed on screen included the name of my father's logistics company, not as a suspect, just as a supplier, but it was enough. The entire table turned toward him. He looked stunned, confused, almost afraid. Then, the anchor said something that changed everything again. The investigation was led by journalist Olivia Carter, whose report has already triggered an official government inquiry. My mother looked at me slowly. "You did this?" I nodded quietly, and for the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. But what none of them knew yet was that the real danger from this story hadn't even begun, and within 24 hours, someone would try to stop me. The room stayed silent for several seconds after the news broadcast ended. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the television in the background. My father was still staring at the screen, not at me, at the documents that had just appeared on national news. His company's name had only flashed for a moment, listed among dozens of suppliers connected to the Northbridge project. It wasn't an accusation, just a record, but the damage was already done. Everyone at the table had seen it. My brother was the first to speak. "Dad, your company supplied materials to that project?" My father slowly leaned back in his chair. "Yes," he said quietly, "but that doesn't mean we knew anything about those safety violations." His voice sounded controlled, but I could see something behind his eyes. Fear. My mother looked at me again. "You never told us you were investigating something like this." "I couldn't," I said softly. "Why not?" my sister asked. "Because the story wasn't finished, and because part of me had been afraid of exactly this moment." My father finally looked at me, not with anger, with confusion. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that this investigation, this national story, that was you?" "Yes." The table went quiet again. For years, my father believed my work meant nothing, just articles on the internet. And now those same articles were appearing on national television. But the moment didn't feel like victory, because something else was bothering me. The news report, it had aired too early. I hadn't released the article yet. My editor and I had planned to publish the full investigation the following morning, which meant only one thing. Someone else had leaked it. And that thought made a cold feeling spread through my chest, because only 3 people had access to the complete investigation files: my editor, my legal advisor, and me. I pushed my chair back slowly. "I need to go," I said. My mother looked surprised. "Now?" "Yes." But before I could stand up fully, my phone vibrated again. A message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. "You should have stopped digging." My heart began beating faster. I showed the message to no one. Instead, I slipped my phone into my pocket and forced a small smile. "I just remembered something I need to finish tonight." My father watched me carefully. For the first time that evening, his voice sounded different, not critical, concerned. "Olivia, are you in danger?" I hesitated. Then I said something that was only half a lie. "I don't know." I left the house a few minutes later. The cold night air felt sharp against my face as I walked to my car. My thoughts were racing. Someone had leaked the investigation early. Someone knew I was behind it, and someone had just warned me to stop. I drove straight back to my apartment. The city streets looked normal. Traffic lights blinking, people walking on sidewalks, restaurants still open. But everything felt different now, because for the first time since starting the investigation, I realized how powerful the people involved really were. When I reached my building, I checked my phone again. Another message had arrived, this time from my editor. "Call me now." I dialed immediately. He answered before the first ring finished. "Olivia," he said quickly, "have you seen the news?" "Yes." There was a short pause. Then he asked the question I had already been thinking about. "You didn't release the story early, did you?" "No, because we didn't either." A chill ran down my spine. Then who did it? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Laptop on the desk, papers neatly stacked, coffee mug beside the keyboard. But something felt wrong, like the air in the room had changed. "Olivia," my editor said through the phone. "Yes? You need to be careful tonight." "Why?" "Because the moment that story aired, several very powerful people lost a lot of money." I walked slowly toward my desk. Then I noticed something that made my breath stop. My laptop screen was on. I was certain I had turned it off before leaving for dinner. "Olivia?" my editor asked again. I'll call you back." I ended the call and stepped closer to the desk. The screen showed a single open document, blank, except for one line typed in the center. "We know where you live." My hands started shaking because the apartment door was locked, no windows were open, and I lived on the 10th floor, which meant only one thing. Someone had been inside my apartment, and they hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't damaged anything. They had only left a message, a warning. Slowly, I stepped closer to the desk. The room was completely silent, too silent. My eyes scanned the apartment carefully. The couch was exactly where it always was. The kitchen lights were off. The balcony door was closed. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal anymore, because someone had been standing in this exact room just minutes ago. I forced myself to breathe slowly and reached for my phone. My first instinct was to call the police, but then another thought stopped me. If the people behind this investigation were as powerful as I suspected, the police might already be connected to them. So instead, I called my editor again. He answered immediately. "Olivia?" he said. "I think they were here." "What do you mean?" "Someone entered my apartment." There was a long pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "Did they take anything?" "No." "What did they do?" I looked back at the laptop screen. "They left a message." Another pause. "What did it say?" "We know where you live." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "You can't stay there tonight." "I know. Pack a bag and leave. Go somewhere public." "I will. But Olivia," he added carefully, "there's something else you need to know." "What?" "The government just announced an emergency investigation into the Northbridge project." My heart started beating faster. "That's good, right?" "Yes, but it also means the people involved are desperate now." I closed the laptop slowly. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. After ending the call, I packed quickly. Laptop, documents, external hard drives containing copies of the investigation files. Within 10 minutes, I was back in my car, but instead of driving to a hotel, I drove somewhere else, the hospital, because there was one person I suddenly needed to speak with, my father. When I arrived, I found him sitting in the waiting area. My mother and sister were beside him. They all looked exhausted, confused, worried. My father stood up as soon as he saw me. "Olivia." His voice sounded different now, not critical, not dismissive, concerned. "I need to talk to you." He nodded. We walked outside together. The cold air was quiet around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I told him everything: the investigation, the leaked story, the message in my apartment, the threat. My father listened silently the entire time. When he finished, he rubbed his forehead slowly. This is bigger than I realized. Yes. Then he asked something that surprised me. Did your report accuse my company of anything? No, I said honestly. You supplied materials like dozens of other companies. There's no evidence you knew about the safety fraud. He nodded slowly. Relief passed across his face. Then he looked at me again. I was wrong tonight. The words caught me off guard. What? At dinner. He paused. I shouldn't have called you a failure. For the first time in years, my father looked uncertain. You did something important, he continued quietly, something brave. I didn't know what to say, because I had waited years to hear something like that from him. But before either of us could continue, his phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed instantly. What is it? I asked. He looked at me slowly. That was my warehouse manager. And? My father swallowed. One of the Northbridge apartment buildings. He stopped speaking. What happened? I asked. Then he said the words that made my heart drop. Half of the structure just collapsed. My chest felt tight. What? Half the structure gave way during a storm. My mind started racing. Families lived there. Children, parents, hundreds of people. Is anyone hurt? I asked. Emergency crews are already on site. Then my father looked at me again, and this time his voice carried a strange mix of fear and realization. Olivia, yes? If your investigation hadn't gone public tonight, he paused, no one would have known those buildings were dangerous. In that moment, I understood something. The news report had forced authorities to inspect the structures immediately, and that emergency response had already evacuated several buildings, which meant something terrifying. If the story had stayed hidden, that collapse might have happened while thousands of people were still inside. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before.